Hello, Peter. It's very nice to have you on my podcast today.
Thank you very much for having me.
And you have been famous, I can say, for your work in the police, and you have been telling the stories, and you've been quite fascinating when I listen to some of the podcasts that you have already been on. It is quite fascinating. Of course, my father in Kharkiv is a prosecutor, which has a lot to do with the police investigating the crime. But tell me a little bit more about your undercover missions, which is so fascinating to hear about always.
Okay. Yeah, I joined the police a long time ago. I was a young 17-year-old police cadet and did my training, then became a police constable, got posted to Peckham in South East London, where I did about 4 years in uniform and plain clothes, then became a detective, went as a detective in a CID office investigating all the crimes that would come in there, to Kensington in central London. And then after that, I was at a crossroads in my career, and it was either promotion or specialisation. That was really the choices that I had to contemplate, and I went for specialisation. I was fortunate enough then in 1985 to get posted to the Central Drug Squad at New Scotland Yard, which was the Met Police's premier kind of team for tackling the illegal drugs industry. And I'd not been there very long before I got an insight into how they did their undercover operations, which of course to the broader police were a secret. People didn't know that officers were operating undercover. And I got very, very early insight into it. And I saw how undercover cops were doing it. And I thought, first and foremost, I can do that. But I thought, I think I can do it differently and perhaps a bit better. There was a network of informants that I had that I'd brought with me throughout my sort of policing career. And they were very much involved in the illegal drugs industry, and they would give us insight into what was going on a lot of the time. And what was happening was that undercover cops who had been very successful and very courageous, and I'm not taking anything away from them, but there was a bit of a model that the male undercover cops applied. And that was, they would go to a friendly jeweler in Hatton Garden and borrow a big expensive watch and a bracelet and perhaps a chain and some rings, and they'd have a smart suit, and they would be in the bars of 5-star hotels. And that's where they would do their meetings with the criminals. It worked for them because, of course, it's a fairly safe environment. They can be kept, the undercover cops can be kept under surveillance easily. And that business model had been successful. But word on the street was coming back to me from informants. And the bad guys were saying, if you get invited to a 5-star hotel to meet a fella draped in jewellery sitting in the bar, then he's probably an undercover cop. So, and this was what was coming back to me. So I'm thinking, we're really going to have to change how we do it. And I was very fortunate in that I was supported by some terrific bosses who listened to me. And I said, look, we're going to have to break this business model up and start doing it a bit differently. And they said, well, what do you mean? I said, well, if I'm going to meet a bad guy for the first time, say I'm introduced to him by an informant as a person that's got plenty of money and looking to buy drugs, there's no reason why we have to be in one fixed place. We are only negotiating. So I'm happy to go anywhere with these guys. Let's go onto their territory so they feel nice and comfortable. Let's go into their flats, their houses, their pubs, their bars, their restaurants, where they feel comfortable. And the bosses were like, that's very risky. What if you get kidnapped? I said, well, why am I going to get kidnapped? I've not got any money on me, apart from a few £100 in my pocket. I'm not taking that £100,000 with me on the first 2 or 3 meetings to meet these people. I'm meeting them to get to know them, to build a rapport, and to develop a business relationship with these people. So why would they kidnap me? And even if they did, I'll take that risk. I will have sensed if I'm in danger, and I'll act accordingly. And so with some reluctance, the bosses said, all right, we want to keep you under surveillance though, to know where you go. And I said, well, that's fine, unless I give a particular signal, which is to the surveillance team to stand down and go away, because a lot of these criminals were very surveillance conscious. They were aware of how police did surveillance. They were always on the lookout for surveillance. And so, of course, the last thing I wanted was them possibly spotting a surveillance team. So I usually developed a signal with the surveillance team that meant, I'm happy, everything's fine, stand down, leave me to it. And then I would be off wheresoever I might go with the bad guys. And then, of course, when I left the company of the bad guys and I'd done my what I call dry cleaning, made sure that nobody was following me, that kind of stuff, then I'd go somewhere where I could make contact with my bosses, then meet up with them and then debrief them. So it was a big leap of faith from the bosses to trust me to go off out there into the big bad world of serious and organised crime, largely on my own. And I liked that. It worked for me. I didn't have to worry about, was a surveillance officer going to make a mistake and show out? Would I be in a bar and there's an undercover cop, a surveillance cop sitting over there? Are they going to do something daft? So I didn't have to concern myself about any of those sort of things, because those people just weren't there. It was me, the criminals, talking business, sometimes talking about many, many other things, and getting on with it.
Interesting. And the first question, I suppose, that comes to my mind is, how do they spot you that you are a cop? What are the ways they can spot you?
Well,
do you carry anything with you that records?
No, I very, very rarely wore a wire. Very, very rarely. Because I'd been put up against the wall in pub toilets and searched. And of course, if I'd been wearing a wire on those occasions, my life could potentially have been in danger. So I was very, very reluctant to wear a wire. Hardly ever wore a wire. Some officers did, some undercover officers did. I preferred not to for those reasons. And, you've got to survive on your wits. You've got to be the real deal. You've got to look genuine, sound genuine, be genuine, and convince these people who are often career criminals. They've been born into crime. Criminality is all they know. And you've got to convince them that you are indeed one of them.
How would you do that? You study their networks?
Well, by that time I'd been in the cops for 7 years. I'd met lots of criminals. I'd arrested lots of criminals. I'd run informants. So I kind of had a pretty good working knowledge of the criminal mind. And I lived in an area of South London that was no stranger to drugs and that kind of stuff. So I was pretty well grounded in the ways of criminality. And as a kid, I'd been a bit of a tearaway myself. So, it wasn't too much of a huge quantum leap, really, to portray being a criminal. And what you've got to do when you're undercover, the easiest lie to tell is the one that's closest to the truth. So, So what I would be myself, obviously with a large sprinkling of criminality wrapped into the character, but I would be myself. I had a rule, and they would say, if you're not discussing business, what do you talk about when you're with these criminals? Because sometimes you'd spend the entire night with them. You discuss the business and they go, right, come on in, let's have a drink and let's have something to eat. And this is still used in undercover training today, because I got a message from somebody a couple of weeks ago to say that it's still quoted as an example. I used to talk about three things: fighting, fucking and football, right? Because they were the things I knew about.
FFF.
Yeah, the three Fs, right? So fighting, I used to be a boxer, and of course, you can imagine being in the police, I had many a roll around on the pavements with people. Fucking, we'll gloss over that, but I've always, been attracted to the opposite sex, shall we say. And football. I've got a scar on my leg, and I used to claim that was an injury that finished my career, because I've always loved football as well, of course. So I could talk about football at length. So those were the things we'd talk about, and invariably the criminals that I would hang around with would want to talk about those subjects as well. So they'd be the things we'd talk about.
So for people who from this podcast would like to get some of the examples of the stories, which are always fun to hear, are you allowed to tell some of them?
Yeah, certainly. How about
what's the most fun one?
They're all out there. There's, I've written books and stuff there. The stories are all out there in my autobiography. And of course, there were many stories from 10 years of working undercover. As you can imagine, some quite humorous, some frankly terrifying. It was often pretty terrifying work. And there were many, many successes. Many crooks went to jail for a very long time, courtesy of my work and the work of my colleagues. Because, of course, when the day of the trade comes down, and the drugs arrive on the plot, or the guns, or the counterfeit currency, or the lorry-loaded trainers, or whiskey, whatever commodity it might be that I'm buying, there's a lot of other courageous cops playing their part, surveillance, the arrest teams, and the such like, as I was usually running away, making my escape. A story that I'm kind of particularly keen on, in fact I was telling it to one of my sons just the other night over a drink or three, is a tale of an operation that was not successful. I'd been introduced to this fella, and he was a young guy, so I guess by this time I'm 30 or in my early 30s, and this young lad was in his early 20s. And you could see he wanted to be a big hot shot in the cocaine world, in the cocaine supplying world. And he was telling me that he could supply me with 5 kilos of cocaine, which back in those days was a substantial operation. And I think it was £100,000 I was paying, or 120 or something like that. But he kept insisting over the course of a few meetings that I give him the money, he disappears with the money, and then would return with the cocaine. Well, that was never going to happen. Because, of course, I've got the commissioner's money, the public's money, basically, paid for out of people's taxes. And in the real world of drug dealing, would you give someone £100,000 and then sit there twiddling your thumbs, waiting for the drugs to arrive? Of course you wouldn't, because they're going to disappear with that money, and you'll never see it again, and you'll never get your 5 kilos of cocaine. So anyway, this went on, and I just told him it is not happening. Let's just forget this. It is not happening. And then last throw of the dice, I agreed to meet him. And he arrives at this meeting with his girlfriend. Right? Now, any self-respecting criminal, you keep your women out of it. You do not get your women involved. Moreover, the girlfriend is cradling their baby. Literally a little babe in arms, months old, right? A little baby. And he was saying to me, you give me the £100,000, I give him the £100,000. He is going to leave the baby with me, right? As a guarantee that he will return with the 5 kilos of cocaine. I said,
This is very strange.
yeah, that's how desperate he was to do it, you see. The problem he had on his side of things was he wasn't of sufficient standing in the criminal network to be trusted with the 5 kilos. So he was trying to do something that was beyond his reach, that was beyond his capabilities, that he wouldn't normally do. And so I'm not going to entice him into doing that, because actually by doing that, I would be acting as an agent provocateur. In other words, I would be cajoling him, bullying him, persuading him, making him do something that he wouldn't normally do. And that's illegal. You know, that would render the entire operation pointless, because he would be acquitted at court, because I'd made him do something he wouldn't normally be able to do. So anyway, I've got so fed up with all these negotiations with this bloke, and I just want to, stop it and just end this nonsense. So I turned around to him and I said, okay, so picture the scene. I give you my 100 grand, you give me your baby, and after an hour, you've not come back. After 2 hours, you've not come back. I said, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to wring your fucking baby's neck and throw it in a skip. That's what I'm going to do to your fucking baby. Right? Of course, which I wouldn't ever dream of doing. I've got 3 kids. I've got 3 kids and I love a baby, you know. But his face was like, I said, so this is over. Don't ever bother calling me again. This is done and dusted. So I go back to the yard. I debrief one of the bosses on the way back. And when I get back to Scotland Yard, I get a very, very lukewarm reception. One of the bosses strolls down the corridor, points his finger in my chest and says, well, Blex, you fucked that up, didn't you? I said, no, I didn't. No, I most certainly did not. And you can take your finger out of my chest, or this ain't going to end well for either of us. I said, I did the right thing. That kid could never get access to those 5 kilos, right? It's, you know, I would be acting as agent provocateur. I said, and the way to finish it all, once and for all, was to threaten to wring the neck of his baby and throw it in a skip. I said, and so that's that, and we all move on. But you see, they wanted me actually to really break the law, you know, and somehow be able to pull it off. But I said, no, I've done the right thing. I've saved that kid from a long time in prison because he was trying to do something that he didn't really have the capability to do. So that's how, you know, I kind of wasn't particularly popular that night. Whereas usually I was very popular with the bosses because the drugs got brought onto the plot, people got nicked, I made my escape. Blood got spilt occasionally. There was a fella. He was new to the undercover world, and he kept pestering me to come as my driver. Right? He really, really wanted to be my driver and my minder, you know, and look after the money. So eventually, against my better judgment, I caved in and said, all right, I've got this job going down. It was about 20 or 30,000 ecstasy tablets I was buying up in North London. I was paying like £1 a tablet. So I said, all right, you can come and be my driver on this day of the trade, when the trade was going to go down. So people were going to get nicked, you know, the drugs were going to be brought onto the plot. I was going to show the money and all of that, then give a signal. People appear out of nowhere, nick everybody, and I make my escape. So anyway, it's his first undercover job. And he's been itching to come out with me, because I had quite a reputation for being successful and that kind of stuff. And he's driving this big lump of a BMW, you know, some 5 Series or 7 Series or whatever, huge great lump of a car. And what happened was, it was tense, it always is, very tense on the day of the trade. I'd given my signal for the attack team to you know, jump out of the bushes, decamp out their vans, appear from wherever they are, make the arrest, seize the drugs, and I'm going to escape. Mm-hmm. But unfortunately, I've got the guy in the boot. He's at the boot, and I'm showing him the money in the boot. I've given the signal, and nothing's happened. So I'm just trying to kill time here. And anyway, the pandemonium starts. He wants to take the money with him, and of course I'm not going to allow that to happen under any circumstances. And people are getting nicked, and the drugs are getting seized. Anyway, this driver on his first day panics, right? As people start appearing out of everywhere and running and screaming and shouting. He panics. I'm in the boot, and I've literally got my head inside the boot because I'm wrestling with this bloke with the bag of money. He's not going to get that bag of money. My driver panics, hits the accelerator, right? Travels about 2 feet, maybe a metre, realises he's done the wrong thing, slams the brakes on, and when he does that, the boot of the car comes flying down and lands squarely on my head. Ouch. It fucking hurt, right? And then, of course, what happens? My head is split and blood starts pouring out my head. I've managed to wrestle the money off of him, the bad guy. He's been nicked and dragged away. So I've got the money into the boot. I've slammed the boot, and it's time for me to run away now, in amongst all this chaos. But of course, the faster and the further I run, yes, I was a lot slimmer and fitter in those days, right? The faster I run, the faster the blood pumps out my head. And one of the surveillance team has driven past, and they've put it up on the radio that they've just seen me running past with blood spurting out my head. So in amongst all the pandemonium, people are now worried about me. So anyway, I ran for however long it was and tried to stem the bleeding, and then a car turned up and they took me off to hospital. It was only a few stitches, you know, they cleaned me up and what have you, and gave me something to wear and stitched my head up, and that was kind of fine. But it was the first and last time I ever went undercover with that bloke. Because in the time when the shit is hitting the fan, that is the time not to panic. And of course, he did panic. And as a result, I got my head split open. But the guys got arrested, they all went to court, pleaded guilty and did their jail time.
So what did he want to do by pressing the accelerator and the...
Well, that's it. I think he thought he was going to get away, but of course, you know, the money hadn't been secured in the boot yet. I'm still playing tug of war with this guy over the money. You know, he just panicked. He felt he had to do something, whereas actually he just needed to be calm and do nothing just for a few seconds longer, right? Just a few seconds, please, until I'm out of the boot of the car. Anyway, so there you go. When it all kicks off, sometimes the best thing to do is just do nothing for a moment as you assess the situation. But anyway. And of course, there's many other tales.
Is this the closest you've ever been to genuine death?
On one job, when I wasn't undercover, I was part of an arrest team. I got stabbed in the neck, and you can probably still see the scar there. I think that is one of the occasions where I came pretty close to death. Fortunately, it turned out to be a flesh wound, and it didn't, you know, cut the carotid artery and all of that. If it had done, I think I'd have probably died. I faced guns on a number of occasions. On one occasion, I found a man who had been convicted of murder, had escaped from prison and was on the run, and I found him, I was rather surprised to find him, hidden in the back of a van in a road called Philbeach Gardens in Earl's Court in London. And when I opened the back of the van, because I looked through the windows and it was all just full of junk and builder's stuff, and it was dirty and the windows were grubby, I couldn't see clearly. And it's very early in the morning, we've searched the flat and not found him in there. I've opened the door and I'm on my way in. I'm stepping into the van because I didn't expect to see anybody in there. I'm just being a nosy detective, a curious detective. All good detectives are very curious about everything. And as I literally am clambering into the van, this head pops up from beneath a blanket. And I was so taken aback, I literally said, "Good morning," right? Always having my manners about me. And with that, his arms move to his side and he pulls up a sawn-off double-barreled shotgun, which is about that far from my nose. And he just pulled it up, stuck it under my nose. And of course, I'm fumbling in my shoulder holster, trying to get my gun out, and he's beating me to it. So there's no point hanging around. And in the finest traditions of the Metropolitan Police, I ran away very, very quickly, shouting to my colleagues who were deciding where to go for breakfast in very colourful language that he had a gun. So we all dispersed. I ran down about 4 or 5 cars away from the van.
And he let you?
Dived down in a gutter. Well, he was in the back of the van, so he didn't, I just literally ran as soon as he pulled the sawn off. I just legged it, ducked down behind a car, pulled my gun out, which in those days was an old revolver. That's how long ago it was. And I've got my weapon, and I'm now shouting at him that he's surrounded by armed police and all that kind of stuff. And he wasn't. There was only 2 of us that had guns that morning, and one had already cleared off to the cafe. So it was only me left there with a gun. But of course, I was very assertive. He believed that he was surrounded by armed police. I could see him moving around in the back of the van because I'd run to the front and there was a glass partition between the cab and the back of the van. I could see him moving around. And to cut a long story short, he stayed in that van for about 36 hours. There was a big siege, roads were closed, huge traffic kind of disruption. It was front page story in the newspapers. For about 36 hours, they had hostage negotiators talking to him. They dropped a field telephone into the van for him to use and all of that. And in the end, the same shotgun that he'd put right underneath my nose, he put into his mouth and ended his own life. That was very close. I was very close then. Why he didn't pull the trigger in that split second when he could have done, I'll never know, of course, and we will never know. But I'm very glad he didn't, of course.
Which is why I'm able to have you on my...
It is, Vladimir, so thank you, yes. So yeah, there were a few close scrapes over the years. A number of colleagues did get bashed up and injured. There was a high risk because, of course, the illegal drugs industry is an unregulated world, isn't it? It's the Wild West. No regulation, no rules. Violence is a currency. So it's not surprising that we encountered a lot of violence. People have to protect their turf, don't they? Their manor, their postcode, their business. And how do they do that? They do it through the threats of violence or using violence. That's why there is so much bloodshed in the illegal drugs industry, unfortunately.
What was the atmosphere inside of the police you worked in? I'm from Ukraine, and all of the unsuccessful operations, in case the politician didn't do what he promised to do, everything that happened to be unsuccessful is blamed on corruption.
Right.
Usually.
Right.
They say, it's corrupt,
Right.
They couldn't complete it because they didn't want to. Have you encountered corruption inside of the police?
Yes, and corruption in the police tends to fall, well, certainly back in my day, there was 2 types, really. There was one that had a really strange title, and it was called noble cause corruption. Well, there was nothing noble about it, but that's what they called it. And that would be a case whereby a detective is convinced that you've committed the crime, utterly convinced, beyond any persuasion, you've committed the crime. And so a detective might be tempted to fabricate a confession, to write a false confession. That doesn't happen these days, it can't because of the changes in legislation, and thank goodness for that. To plant some evidence on you. Say for example,
That's nasty.
you were an armed robber, and so a squad might go in and plant a sawn-off shotgun under your bed and say, look what we found. You know, those kind of things. Young black men by certain officers were fitted up and beaten up. You know, and that came under the guise of noble cause corruption. Nothing frigging noble about it whatsoever. And then there's the other kind of corruption, the more self-serving corruption, whereby a police officer might arrest somebody for 5 kilos of drugs, but by the time they get them to the police station and book them in, there's 3 kilos of drugs. You know, where have those other 2 kilos gone? They've gone to be sold, probably back to an informant who will sell them into the drugs industry once again, and then give the corrupt police officers, you know, a large amount of money for them to divvy up. On one such occasion, I was contacted by a young detective who I'd known. I'd worked with him at a police station before he'd gone on a squad. He was on a Scotland Yard squad, a different building, different office to me. And he rang me one day. He said, Peter, we've got to meet. We've got to meet. And I could just hear the fear, the concern in his voice. You know, this was one of those kind of things where you weren't going to meet him tomorrow. You know what I mean? It was right, okay, all right, I'll meet you. And I went and met him, and he told me an absolutely toe-curling story. He'd gone onto this squad. There was a squad of 17, but within the 17, there was an inner sanctum of 10 corrupt officers, okay? So 7 that were straight, 10 that were corrupt on their inner sanctum, and the other 7 knew nothing about the activities of what this 10 would get up to. Because, of course, 10's a sizable team. You can imagine, you know, right, you get rid of the drugs, you know, you go and hide that money, you know, and you can do it almost under the noses of the unsuspecting, honest 7 cops. Right? So anyway, he met me. We went and met in a pub. And he said, Blex, everybody used to call me Blex in those days. He said, Blex, you won't believe what's happened. He said, we had a result. He said, we stole £200,000. Right? Now, this is back in the 90s. So this is a lot of money. It's a lot of money today, let alone but back in the 90s. He said, we stole £200,000. So 10 people got £20,000 each. He said, one of the inner sanctum, so one of the 10, was having a relationship with a female officer who was one of the honest 7. And what he did was he divided his £20,000 down the middle with her. So she now,
She's got the stolen money.
who was a straight runner, has got £10,000 in stolen money. The inner sanctum found out about this. They were livid with their member who had shared his money with one of the straight cops, well, previously straight cops. Yeah? And you know what they were going to do? They were plotting to kill her because she was regarded as the weak link, who, if she had gone to the authorities, to the internal complaints department, and said, I was given this £10,000, I don't want it, I'm straight, I'll give evidence against my partner and against all the other people in the corrupt inner sanctum, they would all be looking at a very long time in prison. So they had decided that they put a contract on her and they were going to arrange to have her killed. A fellow officer, a fellow detective. They were plotting to have that officer murdered. So this young detective who's sitting in front of me in the pub is in absolute bits. Right? He said, I know we shouldn't have stolen the money. He said, I know it's wrong. I wish it had never happened. He said, but plotting to kill one of our own is just a step too far. Rex, he said, help me. I went, "Oh, right. So I said, okay, leave it to me. Now, there's more than one way of skinning a cat, as the expression goes, okay? So that means you can do things in more than one way. There are various ways to do something and achieve a conclusion that will work for people. What I will say is that officer is still alive today, the one they were going to kill, right? She didn't get killed. And some time later, down the road, 5 of the inner sanctum stood trial for corruption relating to other events. And that's all I can say. So sometimes things get sorted out, not perhaps in the most immediate and obvious way, but sometimes things have a strange habit of sorting themselves out.
Wow. Let's see the policing world, the work that you have done from the perspective of the governments that will maybe publish their policies on the police, decide to put more or less of them, give them more or less power. For example, I've been to the London Assembly.
Yeah.
I have talked to London Assembly members, primarily the conservative ones. One of them is particularly passionate about putting more police officers on the streets, protecting the streets in this way. Her name is Susan Hall.
Yeah.
And of course, the Labour part of the assembly, especially the mayor, is extremely dismissive of any questions being asked to him on the police. And due to, I would say, not much power given to the assembly members in influencing whatever decisions he is making, then he is basically allowed by the system to not answer questions.
Yeah.
How bad of a job do you think he's doing, and what are the alternatives now?
I really do not like Sadiq Khan. Very interesting when you talk about Susan Hall, but also questions in the Assembly. Watch carefully whenever he's questioned by a woman. I think he's very dismissive of questions that come from women.
Interesting.
From what I've seen, I think he deals with questions from men in a different manner than he does questions from women. So I wonder whether there's some kind of misogyny going on in the machinations of his head. I find him a revolting politician. I find his manner obnoxious. And unfortunately, in our major metropolitan cities, the mayor is also the police and crime commissioner. I think those powers need to be divided. I don't think the mayor should be the police and crime commissioner, but he is. Now, if there was an independent police and crime commissioner election, like there is everywhere else in the country, apart from the metropolitan cities where those roles are intertwined, I would have run as a candidate for police and crime commissioner in London. And I think I'd have got some fairly significant support. I don't know if I'd have won it or not, but I'd have certainly run. Of course, the difficulty would be is that I would have run as an independent rather than being attached to a major political party, because I like my independence. I like to plough my own furrow in life and not be answerable to a party line or a whip or somebody that's going to tell me what I can say and what I can't say and so on. But of course, that will never be the case because it's the mayor's responsibility. It's tied up in the mayoral election. The Metropolitan Police in London is facing a lot of challenges, many of them created by themselves. Policing has changed in recent years. It used to be a police force. The Metropolitan Police was called the Metropolitan Police Force, and now it's called the Metropolitan Police Service. And it has changed itself into a social service in many regards. They deal with stuff that, quite frankly, they should not be dealing with. Mental health, issues in schools that should be for the educators and not the police. They overreach in so many aspects. Now we've seen them very recently overreaching with regards to people having spats on social media. They've crept into that world. It's really not their landscape. Leave that kind of social media world alone. Let the social media platforms police themselves, unless it spills out onto the reality of the streets or the homes. Then you have to intervene. And what I mean is, somebody writes a post online, I'm coming to burn your house down, and then you catch them on the street with a can of petrol and a rag. Well, of course, the police need to intervene there, but only, I think, when it spills out into the real world as opposed to the online world. They seem to get so offended so easily these days, the police. They really do. And consequently, they're fighting battles that they really, really shouldn't have got themselves involved in. There's still plenty of heroic stuff being done by courageous and brilliant people out there, but police leadership is failing in so many regards. Police training is not what it should be. They're afraid of the D word, discipline. There's nowhere near as much discipline as there should be. And to a certain regard, they're reflecting the wider society that has become more liberal, more fluffy, more easily offended, more woke, if you will. And I think there will be a gradual unpicking of that over the years. It's already beginning to be reined back.
So then, if giving more power to the police is not the solution in many cases, as you say, what is the solution to the crime happening in London?
In many regards, policing is a numbers game. My wife and I were in Rome recently for a city break. Incredible, beautiful, remarkable city. Where we saw lots of police. And there's always that reassurance that you feel when you see them. So I did some research, as you might imagine. The population of Italy is about 10 million less than the UK. So it's not dramatically different, not hugely different. And the recorded crime rate in Italy is half of what it is in the UK. So you're far less likely to become a victim of crime in Italy than you are in the UK. And guess what? They've got twice as many police officers. Double the police, half the crime. It's that simple.
So putting more police officers on the street will deter people from making crime?
I think so. I think they would then be able to have better connection with, and don't be fooled by what I say here, with the communities. Now, police get obsessed about reaching out and engaging with their communities. Listen up, police. There's two communities you need to engage with. The first one is victims of crime, and you need to give them a prompt and professional service. And the second community you need to engage with are the people who commit crime. It's that easy. If you service victims properly and you lock up bad people, the public will start to respect the police once again. Because sadly, at the moment, policing's reputation is largely in the gutter.
Many people on my show have given their opinions about the new, or can I call him new? He's been in power for a year now. Keir Starmer,
Yeah,
who is in the same party, of course, as Sadiq Khan, maybe driven by the same agenda.
they're
I don't know.
mates. They're mates.
And you have been, of course, critical of him too. In which ways is he failing? And could you give some examples related to the area that we're discussing, police?
How long have you got? Because, okay, with regards to the police and the failures of the police, the Metropolitan Police are having to cut their numbers of officers because they don't have enough money. That money is supplied by central government. That is a failing of this government. We need more police, not less, as I've clearly stated. So many parts of London are frankly lawless. With regards to policing, we now have areas where Sharia councils or Sharia courts administer their own form of justice. The police, the British police, should be challenging that at every turn. We have man-made laws in this country that are passed by our parliamentarians. We do not have faith-based laws. So therefore, we should not be having faith-based councils administering their own version of justice. That is fundamentally wrong and needs to be stopped. Crime is on the increase, particularly in London. Sadiq Khan and other politicians will lie to you and say that London's never been safer. It's just fundamentally untrue. There is so much crime that is not recorded because people say to me, I'm often meeting victims of crime in green rooms at broadcasters, and when I'm going about my business, I tend to talk to a lot of people. And I say to them, they'll tell me a tale of woe about how they were robbed or harassed or whatever it might be. And I say to them, did you report it to the police? And invariably, they come back with, what's the point?
Why is that?
Because they know they're not going to get an investigation. They know they'll have to report it online. They know they'll never see a police officer. A police officer will not visit the scene, will not do house-to-house inquiries trying to trace witnesses. They'll do nothing. So people say, increasingly, what's the point? I point out to them that recording every crime, reporting every crime so that it is recorded is very, very important, because then you get a picture of what's happening where, and the police can identify crime trends, for example, crime hotspots. And because I'm an optimistic kind of bloke, you hope that they will deploy some resources and try to deal with it. So it's vitally important that everybody reports that crime, whether it be their phone being snatched, their pedal bike being stolen, the harassment on the tube or the bus or the train, whatever it is. I urge anyone who's a victim of crime, please report it. And there's another really important reason, because if you don't report it, it's not painting a true picture of what crime is actually like. So the stats are even more inaccurate, and it allows people like Sadiq Khan to go on the radio and the television and tell lies.
Wow, yeah.
So it's vitally important on a number of levels that any crime that anybody is a victim of is properly reported to police.
Let's discuss illegal immigration.
Yeah.
I wouldn't like to ask you simple questions like how do we stop it, stop them from coming in, blah, 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 stop the boats. I would like to give you the supposed example when a crime is committed by an illegal whose details are not known to the government, who is, I don't know. The main question is then, how do you track him? How do you discover the crime has been done by him? And how do you then make him face the justice?
Let me rewind a little bit, if I may. Section 3 of the Immigration Act, 1971, clearly states that it is a criminal offence to enter the UK without leave to remain. End of story. So when you get some liberal, fluffy, woke, do-gooder type going on the radio and saying to you, they're irregular immigrants, not illegal, no. No.
They do that? No, I've never heard this.
Yeah. It is not irregular. It is Section 3 of the Immigration Act 1971. So quote that to those people. It is a criminal offence to enter the UK without the right to remain, without leave to remain. Criminal offence, end of. So everybody that comes on one of those dinghies, anybody in the back of a lorry, anybody who flies in or drives in or walks here or swims here, if they don't have leave to remain in the UK, they are committing an offence under Section 3 of the Immigration Act 1971. So dismantle their fluffy language about irregular immigration. No, it's illegal immigration. End of argument. It's very challenging for police, to go back to your question, if they come across a crime scene. And of course, crimes are being committed, of course, not by every illegal migrant, but by some. And it's very challenging for the police if they come across a crime scene or a victim and they give a description of somebody who's not local, who they can't tell. DNA, of course, is sometimes taken when they arrive in the country and stuff, but I don't know whether that's done routinely or not. There are an increasing number of these illegal migrants being arrested for a variety of crimes. So the police are quite clearly getting over the obstacles and the hurdles and the difficulties to find these people and charge them and put them in front of the courts. That, of course, in itself is a scandal, because not only do you come to this country illegally, you then go and commit a crime. I mean, where is the sense of gratitude to a nation for housing you? Where's the sense of appreciation, belonging, integration, if you come to this country and commit a crime? And I don't care what the crime is. I don't care if you steal a bottle of drink out of Greg's when you've come here. You should be arrested and taken straight to a deportation centre and stuck on a plane and flown a very, very long way away from the UK if you come here and abuse our hospitality in any way, shape or form.
So one of the last questions that I would like to ask you on this podcast is relates to your career. Given everything you've done, given everything you've experienced, life threats, all of the challenges, if you were to rewind the time back, would you still join the police?
In the blink of an eye, I'd be back in. Yes, I would. It's very different, of course. Times have changed. The management isn't as it was. The job has changed to a certain extent. But, and this is where I'm going to sound like a recruiting sergeant for the police, okay? If you stick it out, if you're competent, capable, reliable, trustworthy, you're a good person, you're on time, you're smart, whether you're in plain clothes or uniform or whatever it is, then there is a world of opportunities out there like no other job. If you like flying, you can go in the police helicopter and be one of the crew in the police helicopter. If you like water, you can join the Thames division of the Metropolitan Police. You can be a diver, you can drive the boat, you can do any manner of things, and end up searching rivers and such like. If you like dogs, you can be a dog handler, whether that be a search dog, explosives dog, or a frontline general purpose dog that chases burglars in the middle of the night and bites them. Great fun. If you like horses, you can join the mounted branch and ride a horse. If you like catching killers, you can become a detective and serve on homicide. There are also specialist detective roles in just about any sphere you imagine. Cyber, arts and antiques, counterfeit currency, of course drugs, weapons, all that kind of stuff. If you love the front line, you can stay on it for as long as you like, albeit it's an incredibly challenging job. And I've only just started to scratch the surface in the roles that are available. There's a need for analysts and so much more. So if you give it everything and it doesn't break you, you can have a really remarkable career of public service, and it is service to the public, which you can look back on in your later years with considerable pride.
And to finish this off on a positive note, what are some of your proudest achievements from your work in police?
Well, unfortunately, because so much of my career, both undercover and as a regular detective, was against the illegal drugs industry, fighting a war that cannot and will not ever be won, I have to say that the overwhelming bulk of my career was a complete and utter waste of time. Oh. Are there less drugs on the street nowadays as a result of my work? No. Are there less guns on the street today as a result of my work? No. Is society less violent as a result of my work? No. So in that regard, it was a complete and utter failure. If I do look for some crumbs of comfort, I did work undercover against people who wanted me or a colleague, if I went as a team, to murder people. Okay? So they thought we were hitmen. They thought we were assassins. So they would approach us and we'd negotiate and gather all the evidence from them and that kind of thing. And then they would be arrested for conspiracy to murder. So there's people alive today that wouldn't be if those people who wanted people dead had gone to other people rather than being steered in our direction. So that's some crumb of comfort. We need to have a complete rethink about the illegal drugs industry because we've been doing the same thing again and again and again, expecting different results. And of course, we haven't had different results. And I think it's Einstein that said that's the definition of madness. It is madness. We need to legalise and regulate all drugs, and rip the industry away from the grip of organised crime. It's the fourth biggest industry in the world, and we let criminals run it. It doesn't make any sense. But I could be here till beyond midnight talking to you about my views. And
this is very unfortunate that the time of our podcast is over, but thank you so much for being on here. I really, truly enjoyed some of the stories and the passion that you tell them with.
Thank you. I mean, we're only on this planet for a very, very short time. So if you're going to do anything, be passionate about it, because if you put everything into it, you'll get more out of it. Thank you for having me.